Former Teacher of the Year, Philip Beadle, is about to deliver a radical perspective on an age-old problem. He's speaking to a group of heads and teachers at NUT headquarters about the perennial failure of working-class white pupils in Britain's schools.
School, as a formal institution of the state, has come over time to represent and embody posh people's ways. Common children will encounter the formal, proper, posh atmosphere of the school as if it were a foreign country.
In 2005, 260,000 students failed to get 5 good GCSEs. 83%, 220,000, were white. The majority from poorer backgrounds. White working-class children, girls and boys, are more likely to fail at school than any other ethnic group. This underachievement is one of the biggest problems facing education today. But since statistics focus mainly on ethnicity, they can hide the true picture. White working-class failure is masked by white middle-class success.
White working-class boys are the lowest attaining ethnic and social group in our education system. Also, and don't read along in for empire in this, they're the majority culture. Now, this is just a statistical thing. They're the biggest ethnic and social grouping in British education. If they're the biggest ethnic and social grouping, and they are also the lowest attaining, it seems fairly obvious that they're going to have a huge, great big drag on the national averages.
We do know that free school meal students at primary and secondary do significantly worse than their non-free school meal cohort children. For example, 20% less in primary school, the grades are, and then rising to 30% plus at Key Stage 4. That's part of the story. Then when you start digging further and you look at white working-class boys, you've really got some issues to address. And they could be attaining up to 45% less at GCSE in Key Stage 4. And the tail starts to begin at the end of Key Stage 1. So we're not just not making a difference, we're actually, if you look at data, making the situation worse for particularly white working class boys.
Schools were established in 1870 on a grand scale, a mass scale. And at that time, the people who were most reluctant to send their children to school were those who were from the families or the communities with least income. Because if they took their children to school, it would take them away from the jobs of the time, the factory work, the cheap labour. And there's been a tradition from that time that people from the poorest backgrounds do least well in school. So it's not a growing trend, it's a trend that's been there for 140 years.
I would argue, therefore, that raising the attainment of white working class children in our schools should be the DFES's highest priority. It isn't.
Beadle points to grants for ethnic minority achievement, which will total £178 million next year, whilst there are none specifically targeted at underachieving poor white boys.
I think that the funding that was made available through Excellence in Cities and Educational Action Zones was absolutely phenomenal, and this current government placed enormous store by trying to get a good deal for young people through those two programmes. In the Excellence in Cities programmes, they managed to secure city learning centres with amazing technology available to those sorts of children you're talking about. The government managed to bring in a programme of learning mentors for all children with specific needs. They managed to set up the Gifted and Talented programme and insisted that children from the sorts of groups that you're talking about were part of those programmes. They did an enormous amount to channel funding towards the children that are in the range that you're concerned with.
Difficulties in taking this subject on involve being explicit about race, which can be uncomfortable. You cannot have a properly functioning multicultural education system when the needs of one social and ethnic grouping are completely ignored.
But I do think, and I know from experience, that saying out loud too greatly that we're not serving the white children in the school, if you've got a large ethnic group, with some colleagues in the profession and some colleagues within government circles and local authority circles, that's a kind of, it's a taboo that you know, shouldn't really be stated.
It's appalling. It's just not good enough. I mean, you know, we are all responsible for it. Each one of us in our classrooms and wherever we are responsible, and we have to do something. But we've got to start looking, we've got to start learning, we've got to start talking about it, and not feel that it's an issue that we could be unable to speak about and have the language hijacked, feeling that it's a racist issue, because it's not. It's racist not to talk about it.
Celebrations of multiculturalism, from what I've seen, exclude whites. I've sat through whole rafts of assemblies about Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks and Jesse Owens, where the only white person mentioned all term is Adolf Hitler. And I've watched the white kids squirm with guilt, embarrassment and shame as they're force-fed a daily diet of the doctrine of their own obsolescence. How are they possibly to reverse generations of ambivalence or antipathy towards education if they only rarely see images of themselves in the school environment, and most of these are negative? Black History Month is controversial amongst the white working class. Not in that they don't recognise the black people's right to a celebration of their culture and history, but in the fact that there's no similar event through which they may investigate their own culture and how they came to be here.
At the same time, in popular culture, the working class is everywhere, successively demonised in soap operas or reality TV or whatever. And that creates a dangerous sort of mix. On the one hand, policymakers have absolved themselves for responsibility for class demarcations and those sort of issues, whilst on the other hand, they are sort of, the working class itself is served up as entertainment whilst being simultaneously demonised. And that is a real rich brew, which creates a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, it seems to me, in terms of outcomes in schools, and culturally a very dangerous sort of mix in terms of people feeling literally disenfranchised and stigmatised and demonised.
The value systems of white working class kids and the school system don't match up at all. Something the white working class share with all other social and ethnic groups is pride. They have a value system and a long tradition of proud labour, and yet they're aware that they are seen as being of less worth in the eyes of what they would call posh people. If you imply someone's culture is valueless, then offer them access to another culture which you tell them is of more value, they're going to react against it. You attack someone's culture and you attack them. And this attack will cause a defensive reaction.
It's a problem of education anyway that teachers are middle class, and they're teaching children that are working class. They don't speak the same language, and so in a way that class is a factor.
At school and in life, middle class people tend to behave as if they're doing working class people a favour, educating them, teaching them how to live a proper life, and then wondering why it doesn't work.
Well, I think that they can be perceived as being awkward or difficult or disrespectful and unwilling to cooperate, when really it is a kind of, it is a language, it is a way of going about things. I mean, you know, you say to a youngster in an inner city school, what on earth do you think you're doing? They're likely to tell you what they thought you were doing, and they'll tell it to you in no uncertain terms. You ask a sort of fairly well-brought-up middle-class child, what on earth do you think they're doing? They'll probably say, sorry, sir. So the kind of rhetorical question is a favourite method of dealing with youngsters amongst teachers.